Hey folks, Tactard Ted here. So let's talk about freedom. Yes, freedom, one of the greatest words in the American lexicon. Freedom, freedom. We have freedom of this, we have freedom of that. We have freedom of the others, we have freedom of speech. Well, guess what, folks? You're not nearly as free as you would like to imagine. No, you're not. You're not. You're not, because there are certain things we can't do. I can't simply decide to go break into your house and take what you want. That stuff doesn't belong to me. I'm encroaching on your freedoms then. Your freedom's doing what you want. So certain amounts of freedom don't exist. Certain levels of freedom don't exist. Because at a certain point, some of these guys who believe in unlimited freedom, you are sociopathic. You want to be free? Hey man, find yourself a mountaintop and go to it. Build yourself your cabin with off the grid. If you can find a woman that's going to put up with you living up on the side of a mountain, raise your kids, educate them. That's all freedom. What isn't freedom? Well, intimidating your neighbor because he has a different attitude or a different belief is not freedom. No, that's engaging in misconduct. That is trying to force someone into doing your bidding because you don't agree with them. That's the opposite of freedom. You're trying to make that other person bend to your will. So when you dox people and you show up at their front door and you want to threaten them and make veiled threats, you're not advocating for freedom. You're trying to use what you think freedom of speech is to intimidate and make someone else bend to your will. And this is one of the reasons we have all these anti-bullying things going on. What's amazing is we pay all this attention to bullying in school, and we see the benefits now because we have people who bully each other in daily life. You don't like what I say, so you show up, you threaten me, you threaten my kids. And I'm not saying that. And yes, I've had threats and I just don't care. I don't care. One of the reasons the threats really don't have much impact on me is, number one, I'm not scared of you. Number two, you go to the threats when you run out of legitimacy for your arguments. We value freedom. We value freedom. What is freedom? What inherently makes freedom? Why is Ukraine a free and sovereign country? Why is the Ukrainian freedom so important to a lot of you folks? Well, as far as I can see, the only reason that Ukraine happens to be a free and sovereign country at the moment is because of the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. Ukraine didn't do that. That was a group effort. All the Soviet republics got together and threw out the Soviet government. Done, finished, kaput. Socialism, don't need it. That's a freedom right there, a freedom of speech, when everybody gets together and says, we don't want to do and we're not doing it. So you follow the current narrative, the Ukrainians are minding their own business. This is the current narrative. It's not happens to be the truth, but it's the current narrative. Ukraine was minding its own business, dealing with its right to self-determination, and its neighbor doesn't like the fact that it's making some certain choices. So Russia comes down on them and has a war rhetoric. Hey, you don't like this, we'll come after you. Just like the bullying and threatening I was mentioning. And Ukraine says, no, go stuff it in your pipe. And the next thing you know, Russia invades. Fits my bullying narrative, doesn't it? Here we got somebody who has freedoms, and somebody else is using threat of violence to change that freedom. Now, let's switch out some of the words. Let's switch Ukraine with Russia. Let's switch Donbass for Ukraine. The people in Donbass, what doesn't give them a right to decide? What doesn't give them freedom of choice? What doesn't give them freedom of speech? What doesn't give them the freedom of self-determination? These are valid questions. The people in Donetsk, Lugansk, those folks want freedom. They want a freedom to be able to speak their native tongue, which they haven't been allowed to do since 2014, not legally. Shop owners get persecuted for speaking their native language. Can you imagine going into a Hispanic grocery store and saying, hey, folks, you're not allowed to speak Spanish? Can you imagine that? Could you imagine we're going to punish you if your children run around speaking Spanish? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that we're going to punish you for celebrating traditional holidays of your ethnicity? And what honestly was your country just 30 years ago. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine us saying we're not allowing you folks out there who happen to be Hispanic from celebrating Cinco de Mayo? You're not allowed. You're not allowed. What if we told people who, African Americans, you can't celebrate Kwanzaa? And if you do, we're going to put you in jail and intimidate you. Because that's what's been going on in Donbass. Their ethnic holidays, 9 May, the celebration today, the celebration of the end of World War II. The Ukrainian government doesn't allow it. They intimidate people who attempt to simply wear a ribbon on their clothing, simply walk around saying, "Ura Pobeda," our victory, hooray victory. Those people get discriminated against. Those people had their rights of free speech and free determination trampled. Yes, mighty Ukraine. We're all upset about Ukraine. We're all upset about Ukraine as they're not sovereign. Their freedoms are being encroached on by Russia. What about poor Donbass? Legitimate question, folks. What about poor Donbass? What about those folks that are having their rights trampled? I mean, let's face it. A lot of you folks come out there and you get your freedom of the press, which isn't free. You're getting one side of the issue. They tell you what you want to hear. And between big tech and the government, they censor you. And they're not really censoring you. They're not quieting you. They're censoring what information that you're allowed to see. They want to ban certain TV channels. They want to ban certain media. They don't think you need to see it. Because if you see it, you'll understand there's another side to the story. All stories have two sides. All stories have two sides. You don't believe me? Talk to a group of folks from the Carolinas about the American Civil War. Then talk to a group of folks from Northern PA about the Civil War. You're probably going to find that there are many conflicting attitudes about that and many conflicting narratives. One side will believe one thing, one side will tell you states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. The other will say, in slavery, preserve the Union, and it's all their personal narrative. And I will tell you the truth. Truth always lies somewhere between the extremes. But you can't figure out where that truth is if you don't get the other side of a story. And I will tell you, a lot of the things I post that come out of Russia anymore, I used to worry about it. I used to try to find stuff that I could corroborate. And I felt that I had to put that out. I wouldn't put out anything until I had something. Because early on, I was looking for somebody who could speak Chechen, because I was told, well, this is a Chechen here. It turned out not to be. It turned out to be an old video from Haiti. And I couldn't understand the language. You didn't see anybody's face. You just heard people talking. So I was real careful not to. The problem is, the side we're getting in America isn't very careful about what they put out. And, freedom of the press, they can say anything they want, but then they openly lie to you. A good example of this is Snake Island. Day one, Snake Island, which Snake Island's back in the news for those folks who are wondering about. But Snake Island on day one, the glorious stand of Snake Island. Russian warship, go fuck yourself. And all 13 of them died. The only problem was there wasn't 13 of them there. The only problem is nobody died. They all surrendered, and they ended up in captivity. But it was put out as the gospel. Absolutely the gospel. Those poor people were martyred. They were all martyred for their cause. Goes to Kiev. Same deal, right? So we're not being allowed both sides of a story. And the side of the story we're getting isn't always accurate. So I've got no compunction anymore about just posting up whatever comes down the pipe. Don't care. Why don't I care? Well, hey, we all have the freedom to look at everything and decide what we believe. The press is not believable anymore. It's not believable in this country. It's not believable overseas. I hate to be super critical, folks, but you can't trust any of it anymore. And if the government, my government, your government, whoever's government, is trying to force me to accept a fact that I don't agree with, then I have to sit down and say, hey, you're misleading me. You're misleading me on purpose. And I hate to be that way. We got freedom. We've got freedom to say no. We got freedom to say, I don't believe in this. I don't subscribe to it. And you have the freedom to disagree with me. What you don't have the freedom to do is you don't have the freedom to threaten me. You don't have the freedom to show up at my door. You don't have the freedom to do any of that. But we see people doing it all the time. And one of these days, these people who are engaging in this coercive and bullying deal, one of these days something bad's going to happen. And it almost happened in Kentucky a year ago. If you remember, the BLM rioters were out there and they came into somebody's yard and they stuck guns in their face because they weren't having it. You're not going to come here and intimidate me. You're not going to come here and burn my shit down. So just a little idea, a little thought about freedom today. And you're more than welcome to hit me up in the comments. You're more than welcome to tell me I'm nuts. I don't care. That's your deal. Now, if you agree with me, hey, I'm like everybody else. If you agree with me, hey, I'll appreciate it. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. I'm a big boy. I can take all that. And I can handle people disagreeing with me. And I have a right to disagree with you. And that's where we're at. All right, folks, I will talk at you later. Bye.